Whether you're a content creator or an editor or just anyone that's heavily involved in the production of a YouTube video, we all know how difficult it is to meet that big deadline or to just keep a consistent upload schedule. And obviously, a big part of that always comes down to the editing process. So essentially, if you're not editing as efficiently as you could be, then you're basically constantly falling behind. So in this video, I'm going to go over 3 things that I've personally learned from working with channels with over 1 million subscribers on YouTube about how to edit as efficiently as possible so that you can become more efficient in your own production process. The first thing that I've learned is to always have a clear sequence that you follow in terms of the order that you edit in. So, for example, what I normally follow is stage 1, which will be the rough cut. So in this phase, you basically want to go through all the footage available as quickly as possible. And you're not looking to perfect anything at all here. You just want to clear the majority of things that you know won't be in the final edit and just narrow it down to where you have a solid base to work from. And like I said, the key with this stage is really to just remove the majority of stuff that clearly doesn't need to be in the final edit. And this includes things like failed takes, the person speaking, going on long tangents about things that don't move the video forward, and just general things like that where you can sort of work out within 5 seconds, oh yeah, this isn't going to be in the final video. And you don't want to be perfecting things here whatsoever, because that's going to be eaten into valuable time that you can then use in the later stages, which I'll get onto in a moment. Now, for stage 2, this is where you want to move on to a fine cut. So this is basically like a chiseled down version of the rough cut. So this is where you can start to layer in some B-roll. You can start to clean up some cuts. You may want to do a J cut or an L cut and things like that. And again, you don't want to be perfecting things too much here, because the same with stage 1, if you add too many things, like for example, you're trying to add in a piece of VFX here, then if you spend, say, 2 hours doing an animation, you may end up adding the music and the sound design, and by the time you get to that point, you're like, oh shit, it doesn't even fit in anyway. So it's like, why have I just spent 2 hours doing it, and it's not even going to make the final cut? So that's why you just do basically a cut down version of the rough cut, refine it a little bit, like enough to where you're starting to see a story forming here of how you think the video is going to look at the end, and then you just leave it as that. Don't polish it too much, and then you get on to the next stage, which I'll go on to in a moment. This is also where it helps to add things like markers as you're going through, because like I said, you don't want to be doing things that you might end up deleting later. So if you go through and just add in markers, say you have an idea for an animation you may want here, or a particular sound effect because the speaker has done something funny and you want to emphasize that, then you just put a little marker, whether you edit in, Premiere, Final Cut, DaVinci, whatever. They all have markers. So you just add a little marker and you just put your idea there to say, oh, maybe a screenshot from this website would be good here to reference what they're saying, because there's no other way maybe to visually represent that. Then you put a marker for it and you just come back to it later, and that way it's just like a smoother process where you're not spending time doing everything that comes to mind. You just put a marker and come back to it later. Now on to stage 3. This is where you begin to add the music tracks that are layered underneath all the footage. So with this part, you don't really want to get into like the sound effects yet. Basically just the music you want to focus on, because if you start adding sound effects before you've even done animations, let's say, then that's another thing that you're gonna complicate for yourself, because animations and VFX tend to rely a lot on the sound design. They sort of go hand in hand. So if you've got an animation where you need to add like a whoosh or something, well, you can't add the whoosh before the animation, because what are you lining it up with, you know? So that's why you do it in this particular order, because otherwise you're just wasting basically hours. If you do, instead of having, say, stages, you just did it all in one, and you just did whatever you felt like, then you would waste, on a 20-hour edit, you may take 5 to 10 hours longer than you should be. The only time it sort of makes sense to start adding sound effects here is like with the music tracks. Sometimes you'll add in a sound effect to transition from one to the other. So instead of just like stopping, say, track 1 dead and then going straight into track 2, which may sound really weird because the rhythm of the tracks doesn't like intertwine very well, then if you add like a whoosh sound or something like that to cover up the transition, then it's going to be a lot smoother of a entrance into the next scene, essentially, as you obviously typically use music to go from one scene to the next, or a scene that you've sort of manufactured then. But yeah, that's the only case I'd say it makes sense to get straight into the sound effects, but other than that, I wouldn't bother. And for the music as a whole, you just want to be getting sort of a good feel for what the viewer should be experiencing at each moment. You don't have to dwell on it for way too long. Just keep replaying the parts that you want the music track on and just feel, what do I feel here and how can I emphasize that even more? And a good way to sort of develop this skill is to regularly watch films and shows, because you'll be able to watch something, and if it triggers a certain emotion, or you feel like tense and it's really pulled you into a certain scene, you can kind of work out, okay, what is working well here? Right, the cuts, maybe they've used certain close-ups and they're cutting faster, or they're using a really tense drawn ambient sound in the background that sounds eerie, those kind of things. And if you just make note of that, or make mental notes of that as you go along, you'll be able to pick up certain things and then implement it into your own editing or your own YouTube videos. And that's when you start going from a YouTuber to someone who's actually making full-on productions, because at the end of the day, human psychology, human emotion, it all works the same across all editing. It doesn't matter whether you're doing a Netflix documentary, a film, a YouTube video, an Instagram reel, it is all the same. So once you start understanding the music side of it and you can pick up on that, you'll just get a lot more fluid at it over time and therefore more efficient. Now, stage 4. This is where you do the VFX and animations. Now, this is the part where editors put way too much emphasis on, because it really isn't as important as they make it out to be. Like, the main purpose of VFX and animations in a YouTube video should just be, does it showcase something visually that can't be showcased any other way through the footage, or, well, yeah, essentially the main footage, A-roll, B-roll. And if that is the case, and it really needs to be on there, and it helps to establish a point better, then it can stay in. Because, if you've got a good story, good pacing, good sound design, then really VFX isn't that important, because if you watched, say, one with a lot of VFX, and it had the exact same pacing, storytelling, all of that, sound design, and then you watch the VFX version, or you compared, the VFX version and non-VFX, you'd feel quite similar. You may think, oh yeah, that looks cool, but you're not really gonna feel any different at the end of it. So any time really that you're spending unnecessarily on VFX is more time that could be put into the actual story itself. And now, stage 5. This is the final stage, being the sound design stage. So, in this part, like I said, it needs to be after the VFX and animations, because if you've got something where like a page is flown on screen or a screenshot and some kind of graphic, then you may need to add like a whoosh that aligns with that movement, and that's obviously not something you can do before the visual is even there, because how can you line something up to something that doesn't exist yet? This stage is where you add in things like ambience, whooshes, risers, all your general sound effects, which help to elevate the feel of the entire production. And the thing is with this is a lot of the times it does go unnoticed, but that's not really a bad thing, because at the end of the day, your job as an editor is to make the viewer feel something. It's not for you to be recognized for what you've made. And that's why obviously people tend to focus on the visual effects, because it's more clear, right? You can look at that and say, oh, look what I've made. I made these fancy graphics and colors and whatever. And with the sound design, it's not really as clear as that, but actually is more important than that visual effects side. Because you think about it, what makes life, I guess, feel real is like all the little sounds, isn't it? You hear the birds, the wind, the floor creaking as you walk in. These things make everything feel real, not some made up colourful graphic that's flying through the sky or whatever. And so it's nothing to worry about because it gets unnoticed, and you should focus on this a lot more than the visual effects side. If you edit each video with these 5 stages in mind, then you'll be on the path to becoming a properly efficient editor and not a time waster anymore. Now, the second thing that I've learned is to have shortcuts for basically everything, and I probably take this to the extreme more than most editors, because I think most editors, they go on their editing software and they just basically look at the default list of commands or shortcuts and they try to memorize those. Well, I've literally done it like it's a video game. Like, I use literally A to move left, and then S to pause, and D to move right. And I've done a lot of little things like that, where I've mapped out the keys very similar to what you'd expect in a video game. Like common ones like Fortnite, Apex, anything sort of like that. So if you're a PC gamer, or you were a PC gamer, then I think this is definitely a good thing to take on board. It's just like, think to yourself, what are the most memorable keys that I'm used to already that I can map out, the most common editing functions on. And then by doing that, it just creates that autonomy. Yeah, that's the one. Autonomy. With your decisions, and it just becomes more second nature to you because you've already basically gotten used to those keys before. Every time you hesitate on an edited decision where you're thinking about, oh, what's the shortcut for that, or what key do I need to press, whether that's dragging multiple clips simultaneously, or you're trying to find the multicam viewer and you don't know where it is, all these things just continuously add on minutes to the final edit, and that's time that you don't want to be wasting at all, because this is time you could have used on building the story or perfecting, more important parts of the edit, or just touching grass or having a life. So make sure you go through all the shortcuts you have and memorize them all. And if you think, this shortcut's annoying, I've forgotten what it was about 10 times, just say it to something easier, something that you remember. You might think, Command R works well for me because I used to use that key combination in Minecraft. I don't know what you do. I don't know what you do with your life. The third thing I've learned is not so much of an action, but it's more so just a mindset. And that's to work on projects that you actually want to work on. Like, it sounds good in theory. Say you've got this big project that's offering you loads of money, and it sounds good on paper. But if you hate the client that you're working with, or the people that you're working with, and you're not enjoying the actual project itself, then you're not going to edit efficiently whatsoever. Because it's like, take like a pro footballer, for example. They're a pro footballer because that's their passion and that's what they wanted to work on. And even if you offered them loads of money, they probably couldn't become a pro basketball player, right? Because if they had the passion for that, they'd already be doing it. So just lean into what you're passionate about. And I always find that the money tends to follow that, because that's when you're able to put in your full effort, your full energy, and it's just more natural to you rather than trying to force and box yourself in thinking, oh yeah, it sounds good, I should be able to do this. Just allow yourself to work on whatever you want to work on naturally, and that's how the team or whoever you're working with, you'll all work much better together if you all want to be there and you all want to work towards the same goal. And if you're relatively new to the content game or editing in general, you might be thinking, well, how can I actually do this? Because you may be struggling to get clients, or you're just taking what you can get. Or if you're producing videos yourself, you might be like, well, I just gotta make content on wherever because, otherwise no one watches my videos. Well, that's all completely fair. And the key with that is to just keep getting experience, and then over time you can get more selective as you build connections and you build a following and establish yourself, and then you can truly lean into, the projects you found most interesting to you, and not just what someone else says should be a good fit for you. Anyway, those are 3 things that I've learned personally to edit efficiently as possible. I don't know, maybe one day I'll do like a live recording where I actually do an edit and just basically in the moment maybe explain quickly. I obviously won't be able to put full energy into it, but I'll quickly explain the editing decisions I'm making in the moment, and that may be helpful. But aside from that, if you're interested in working with me, I am pretty busy right now, but if you'd like to reach out for a potential collaboration on a project or anything like that, then feel free to drop me an email, which I'll have on my YouTube channel. And aside from that, I shall see you next week, maybe.